The fluorescent lights inside Andrews Air Force Base's command center hummed faintly, casting a sterile glow over rows of monitors and consoles. Screens flickered with live feed satellite imagery, air traffic data, and coded communication streams from around the world. Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore sat at her assigned station, headset snug over her ears, hands resting lightly on the controls before her. It was the kind of quiet vigilance she had lived countless times before, yet something in the air tonight felt different. Her eyes tracked the glowing cursor on her main monitor. An unidentified object had been detected crossing the first perimeter of restricted airspace. At first, it appeared like countless anomalies she had seen during late-night shifts misread signals, weather balloons, stray civilian drones that wandered where they shouldn't. But the object didn't drift. It moved deliberately, measured, like it had a purpose. Suddenly, the console emitted a sharp tone, and a red warning flashed across her screen. The words "Potential Hostile Await Command" blinked ominously. Sarah straightened in her chair, pulse quickening. Around her, the chatter in the command center thinned into silence. Technicians leaned closer to their screens. Officers exchanged wary glances. Everyone knew the protocol. Once an unidentified craft entered that zone, the timeline to respond narrowed to mere minutes. "Track confirmed," muttered Officer Daniels from the console beside her. His voice trembled slightly. "Speed steady, altitude holding. It's not drifting. It knows where it's going." Sarah's throat tightened. Training kicked in, rehearsed 1,000 times in simulators. Step 1. Confirm target identity. Step 2. Await direct command. Step 3. Engage if ordered. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that those steps suddenly weren't enough. Through her headset, a calm but tense voice cut through. "All stations, maintain readiness. Higher command has been notified. Do not engage until ordered." It was Colonel McAdams, the senior officer in charge tonight. His tone was steady, but Sarah detected the edge beneath his words. He was waiting for clearance from the Pentagon, and clearance never came quickly. Seconds dragged like hours. The drone, if that's what it was, moved steadily toward coordinates no foreign object should ever approach. On her screen, its blinking marker crawled closer to a red boundary line that represented restricted U.S. infrastructure, a line that no one was supposed to cross. Sarah's hand hovered over the firing control. She could lock onto it with one keystroke. Her heart pounded as sweat pricked the back of her neck. "Still no order?" Daniels whispered. Sarah shook her head, eyes locked on the screen. Nothing. The silence in the room deepened. Everyone felt it, the gap between training and reality. Protocol dictated restraint until given permission. Yet the threat wasn't slowing, and every person in that room knew how catastrophic delay could become. Sarah's mind flashed back to her academy days. She remembered an instructor pacing the front of the lecture hall, his voice stern as he spoke about hesitation. In combat, hesitation kills. But reckless action kills too. Your challenge as officers is knowing the difference. At the time, she had nodded with the rest, believing the lesson was simple. Now, seated at her console with the weight of lives pressing down on her, she realized nothing about that choice was simple. The object edged closer. Its flight path was steady, deliberate. Not a civilian drone. Not an accidental trespass. It was moving with intent. Sarah clenched her jaw, forcing herself to breathe inly. Every muscle in her body screamed to act, to take control before it was too late. But discipline held her in place. Not yet. Not until the order comes. The colonel's voice filled her headset again. "All stations, stand by. Intelligence review in progress." No engagement authorization yet. His words were meant to sound reassuring, but Sarah heard the hesitation underneath. He was waiting too. He knew as well as she did that the clock was running out. Her gaze shifted briefly to the faces around her. Daniels looked pale, his knuckles white against the edge of his console. Another technician muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. The weight in the room was suffocating, like everyone was holding their breath at once. Sarah's hand hovered inches above the firing key, trembling slightly. She thought of her parents back home in Ohio, unaware of the choices their daughter might face tonight. She thought of the cadets who trained beside her, some now stationed overseas, trusting that officers like her would make the right decisions when it mattered. She thought of the civilians below, living their lives in peace, never knowing how fragile that peace truly was. Her heart pounded harder. If this object is hostile, and I wait too long, people could die. The thought struck her like a blade. But another thought followed just as quickly. If I fire without orders, and it isn't hostile, I could start something far worse. Her chest tightened as the weight of those two realities crushed her. The command center remained tense, the silence broken only by the faint hum of machines and the occasional click of keys. Sarah focused on the glowing red blip inching closer and closer to the restricted boundary. Her every instinct screamed that she was at the edge of something history would remember. And yet no order came. "Lieutenant," Colonel McAdams said suddenly, his voice low but firm through her headset. "Maintain control. Hold your position." Sarah froze, staring at her screen. Hold. That was the order. Her finger lingered just above the key. She could disobey. She could fire now and possibly prevent disaster. But she would also be disobeying direct command, a line drilled into her since her first day in uniform. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her mouth went dry. She clenched her fists, willing herself to steady her breathing. The drone's marker touched the edge of the restricted boundary line. Officers around her sucked in sharp breaths. Someone muttered, "It's crossing. It's crossing." Sarah's world narrowed to a single decision. The command center, the voices, the hum of machines all faded into the background. All that existed was the blinking red light on her screen, the weight of her training, and the terrifying silence of the order that never came. Her finger hovered over the trigger key, trembling with the force of everything she carried. Act now or hold the line. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. And in that suffocating silence, Sarah realized her choice, one she knew would change everything. The colonel's order still echoed in Sarah Whitmore's headset. Hold your position. Two simple words that felt heavier than any command she had ever received. Her finger hovered above the firing key, close enough that a twitch of muscle could have unleashed a missile. The blinking red marker on her screen crawled forward, now fully breaching the restricted zone. The command center was a hive of suppressed panic. A dozen officers stared at their monitors, faces pale in the sterile glow. Daniels sat beside her, whispering through clenched teeth, "If this goes wrong, it's on us." His voice trembled, equal parts fear and fury. Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Every ounce of focus was locked on the glowing dot, a tiny symbol carrying the weight of life, death, and national security. Her throat tightened. The room was quiet, unnaturally so, as though everyone feared that even a cough might shatter the thin thread of control holding the situation together. Somewhere behind her, a junior technician muttered a prayer under his breath. The colonel's voice cut through again. "Repeat, no engagement. Maintain readiness." Sarah clenched her jaw, forcing her hands to stay steady. She knew the colonel wasn't calm. He was waiting for clearance, just like her. That clearance had to come from higher authority, possibly even the Pentagon itself. But Pentagon chains were slow. By the time the bureaucracy untangled itself, the object could be right above them. "Sir, it's advancing toward Grid 9, Daniel said urgently into his headset. His voice cracked. "That's a civilian zone. The colonel didn't respond. Sarah's heart pounded harder. She could hear it in her ears, a steady, thunderous beat. Her mind split into fragments, one screaming to obey orders, another screaming to protect lives. If it's hostile, every second counts. If it's not, firing first could start a war. She blinked hard, trying to steady herself, but every blink replayed images she didn't want, disaster scenarios she had studied in training. She remembered one case study in particular, an officer in a foreign military who had shot down an unidentified aircraft without clearance. The craft turned out to belong to a neutral nation. The result? An international crisis that nearly ignited a regional war. Sarah had never forgotten that lesson. Obedience wasn't just loyalty, it was protection against rash decisions that could unravel entire nations. But obedience wasn't simple anymore. On her screen, the object's path adjusted slightly. Its trajectory wasn't random. It was steering deliberately toward a restricted facility. Sarah's stomach dropped. The hairs on her neck rose. "Sir?" she said into her headset, her voice low but urgent. "If we wait any longer, it could be too late." The colonel answered instantly, steel in his tone. "That's not your call, Lieutenant." The words hit her like a slap. Not her call. She knew it was true. She was trained to follow orders, not to rewrite them. Yet her gut twisted violently. Her body screamed to act. Daniels leaned closer, whispering so only she could hear. "If it's armed, you'll regret waiting. You'll never forgive yourself." Sarah's hands trembled slightly above the controls. She wanted to shout at him, to remind him that disobedience wasn't bravery. It was mutiny. But the words caught in her throat. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to her family. She pictured her younger brother, still in high school, joking over dinner the last time she visited home. She pictured her mother's hands squeezing hers tightly before Sarah left for duty, whispering, "Be brave, but be smart." Those words lingered now, circling her like a whisper from another life. The object moved closer. 10 miles. 8, 7. Time fractured into jagged pieces. She could feel every second pass, sharp and heavy. A technician on the far side of the room suddenly shouted, "It's crossing into critical proximity." 5 miles out. His voice cracked with fear. Heads whipped toward Sarah, eyes wide. The room's silence shattered. Voices overlapped, frantic, some urging caution, others screaming to fire. The air buzzed with panic. Sarah felt the weight of their eyes pressing into her, as though they expected her alone to decide. Her headset filled with overlapping channels, confusion, chatter from higher command, updates from intelligence analysts. She tried to filter them, but it was chaos. She picked out fragments. Possible foreign origin. No confirmation yet. Await final clearance. Her pulse spiked. Final clearance. It was coming, but would it come in time? Daniels hissed again. "Whitmore, if you don't fire, and this thing detonates, you'll have to live with that." Sarah's hand clenched into a fist above the console. "And if I fire, and it's not hostile, thousands will blame me for the war that follows." The command center felt suffocating. The walls closed in, screens flickered with urgency, and still no order came. The drone's marker blinked closer, relentless. 5 miles. 4. 3. Sarah's breath came shallow, controlled only by sheer will. Her finger hovered again over the firing key, trembling. And then, a voice calm, deliberate cut through her headset. Not the colonel's. Higher authority, Pentagon level. "Hold. Confirmed. Do not engage." Repeat, "Do not engage." Intelligence in review. The entire room froze. Daniel slammed his fist against the console in frustration. "Are they insane?" he whispered. Sarah felt her chest tighten like a vice. The order was clear now. Hold. That was her command, undeniable. But as the object crossed into 3 miles, edging toward what could be catastrophic consequences, she wondered if this order was about protection or politics. Her gut churned. Every instinct screamed at her to ignore it, to press the key and eliminate the threat. Her training, her duty, her oath all screamed to obey. The weight of the choice crushed her. The drone blinked on her screen, closer now than ever. Sarah's lips parted as she whispered, barely audible, "God help me." Far above the Atlantic, satellites traced the intruder's every movement, beaming data streams into command centers spread across Washington. Inside a windowless Pentagon operations room, officials gathered around a wall of screens. The atmosphere mirrored Andrews Air Force Base tension, silence, and the low hum of machines. Only here, the stakes felt magnified. Analysts studied the live feed with grim focus. One leaned toward his monitor, muttering, "Trajectory steady. Targeting restricted grid. No identification code detected." Another tapped furiously at his keyboard, cross-checking foreign databases. The object refused to match any registered ally or adversary. It was an anomaly unclaimed, unknown, and terrifying. From the back of the room, a 4-star general folded his arms. His gaze was locked on the central screen. Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore's console view streamed live from Andrews. He watched her hesitation, the subtle tremor in her hands. Every movement told a story. "She's waiting for the order," said the general quietly. "She's disciplined," replied a civilian intelligence officer beside him. "If she holds, we learn more. If she fires, we may lose more than we gain." The general didn't answer. His jaw tightened. He knew the truth discipline was essential, but seconds decided wars. Back at Andrews, Sarah's body remained taut, coiled like a spring. The command center's air was thick, charged with unspoken fear. Her headset crackled with fragments of debate from the Pentagon, though most of it reached her as garbled static. She only heard enough to understand one thing. They were watching her. The knowledge sent a chill through her veins. Her every blink, every hesitation, was being studied by unseen eyes. The drone's marker crossed deeper into restricted territory. It was now only 2 miles out, gliding steadily toward a facility no foreign craft should ever approach. Sarah's thoughts raced. Why no order? Why are they watching instead of deciding? Her memory betrayed her again, recalling a lecture hall at the academy. An instructor had once described the fog of command, how higher authorities often delayed decisions, preferring to gather intelligence even at the brink of disaster. They'll sacrifice minutes for information. Sometimes those minutes cost lives. She had thought it cynical then. Now she lived it. Daniels broke the silence beside her, his voice low and desperate. "Lieutenant, they're hanging you out to dry. They'll pin it on you if this goes wrong." Sarah flinched. He wasn't wrong. If disaster struck, she would be remembered not as the officer who followed orders, but as the one who failed to act. The thought knifed through her, sharp and merciless. The colonel's voice rang out again, calm but strained. "Maintain your hold, Lieutenant. Higher review in progress." She closed her eyes briefly, forcing a breath into her lungs. Her fingers still hovered above the firing key, suspended between action and restraint. Inside the Pentagon, the debate grew heated. "She needs to fire," barked one official, slamming his fist against the table. "Every second wasted increases risk." "And if it's not hostile?" countered the intelligence officer sharply. "She shoots down a neutral craft, and we're in a diplomatic firestorm by morning. Do you want to answer to Congress? Or worse, the President?" The general stayed silent, his gaze never leaving Sarah's trembling hand on the screen. He had commanded soldiers in the field. He knew what it felt like to stare into that impossible choice, when obedience and instinct collided. "She's right there," he muttered finally. "And we're asking her to carry the weight of a nation while we debate." No one responded. Back at Andrews, Sarah's headset crackled again, this time clearer. "Whitmore," came the colonel's voice. "Intel confirms possibility of foreign prototype. Still under review. Hold fire. Foreign prototype." The word stabbed at her gut. A test, maybe? An experiment? But why here, in restricted space, without clearance codes? None of it made sense. Daniels cursed under his breath. "They're gambling, Sarah. Gambling with us." Sarah didn't reply. Her eyes locked on the glowing marker. 1 mile, less. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her instincts roared louder than the colonel's orders. She could feel the potential devastation rising with each tick of the clock. Her hand trembled violently now, the firing key an inch away. In her mind, scenarios cascaded. She fires, and the drone explodes harmlessly, revealing it was nothing but a test craft. She's court-martialed, disgraced, remembered as reckless. She holds, and the drone detonates inside the restricted zone, killing civilians or crippling infrastructure. She's remembered as cowardly, forever haunted by lives lost. She disobeys, fires anyway, and it's hostile. She saves lives, but becomes the officer who broke protocol, her heroism buried under bureaucratic reprimand. Every path ended with her name written into history books. But how? Hero? Villain? Fool? Her chest heaved with shallow breaths. The colonel barked again, louder this time. "Lieutenant, hold your position." Her eyes burned. Her body shook. The drone's marker blinked at 1/2 mile now, nearly kissing the heart of the restricted facility. "God damn it, Sarah," Daniels hissed. "Fire the damn thing." She snapped her gaze toward him, eyes blazing. "That's not my call." Her words rang hollow, drowned in the roar of her own conscience. Inside the Pentagon, the debate reached fever pitch. "Authorize engagement." An official shouted. "Negative." "Too much risk," countered another. The general slammed both fists onto the table, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Decide now, or you'll lose control of her. She's seconds away from choosing for herself." All eyes turned back to the screen, watching Sarah Whitmore's trembling hand as if it alone carried the fate of nations. The drone blinked at 1/4 mile. Sarah's vision tunneled. Her breath came ragged. Her finger brushed the firing key. Obedience or instinct? Order or action? Disaster or salvation? The room around her dissolved into a blur of faces and voices. Only the screen remained, that blinking red threat pressing closer. Her lips parted. She whispered again, "God help me." And then, in the electric silence of that moment, Sarah made her choice. The silence was unbearable. Every eye in the command center locked on Sarah Whitmore's trembling hand, suspended just above the firing key. The drone was seconds away from penetrating the very heart of the restricted facility. Adrenaline surged through her veins, so intensely she thought she might lose control. "This is it," she thought. "This is the moment." Her finger twitched, brushing the key. She drew in a breath to steady herself, when suddenly the unthinkable happened. The drone jerked downward. Not in a crash, not in a spiraling fall. It descended deliberately, like a bird choosing a landing spot. Gasps rippled across the room. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The marker on her screen slowed, altitude dropping rapidly. "What's it doing?" Daniels whispered, his voice sharp with disbelief. The drone veered slightly off course, away from the restricted facility, and descended toward an open field just beyond the perimeter. It hovered for a few seconds, then landed smoothly on the ground. The blinking red marker turned steady green, signaling it had stopped moving. For a moment, no one breathed. Then chaos erupted. "Zoom in," shouted the colonel. Technicians scrambled, cameras adjusting in satellites, narrowing onto the landing site. On the big screen, the drone came into view. It wasn't what anyone expected. Its frame was sleek, angular, coated in matte black plating. Sunlight glinted off a strange insignia painted along its wings. Not the markings of an enemy state, not the symbols of a hostile power, but something far more perplexing. Sarah squinted at the screen. The symbols were unfamiliar, yet they carried the distinct style of military testing programs. White stenciled numbers lined the fuselage, and a series of geometric logos stood out, sharp and unmistakable. "Those aren't foreign," whispered a technician. "Those are ours." Another voice corrected him. "Not ours." They're allied. The colonel leaned forward, his face pale. "Get me verification." "Now?" Sarah sat frozen, her chest still heaving from adrenaline. She had been seconds away from firing, from obliterating the craft, from potentially starting a chain reaction of consequences that could not be undone. Her body trembled at the realization. The colonel barked again. "Run code checks. Confirm the markings." Technicians scrambled, typing furiously, cross-referencing codes with classified databases. Seconds stretched like hours as the feed zoomed closer and closer. Finally, one technician shouted, "Confirmed. It's an allied drone. Experimental unit. Testing program classified above base clearance." The room fell silent again. Sarah blinked, her breath catching. Above clearance? That meant even the colonel, even the entire command center, had never been told of its existence. They had been asked to defend airspace without knowing friend from foe. "Jesus Christ," Daniels whispered, leaning back in his chair. "We almost shot it down." Sarah's hand trembled as she slowly pulled it away from the firing key. Her palm was slick with sweat. The enormity of what nearly happened crashed down on her like a tidal wave. If she had fired, she would have destroyed a billion-dollar experimental craft. Worse, she would have obliterated something belonging to a trusted ally, risking an international crisis of staggering proportions. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I was 1 second away." The colonel pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. His voice trembled with both anger and relief. "Stand down. All stations, stand down." The command center buzzed with murmurs, disbelief, and nervous laughter from those too shaken to stay silent. Sarah remained silent, her hands clenched into fists on the console. Her mind replayed the moment on loop, the choice, the almost irreversible act, the stunning descent of the drone. Above them, in the Pentagon, the reaction was no less stunned. The general leaned forward, eyes narrowing on the screen. "Allied experimental program," he muttered. "And no one thought to inform the defense network?" A civilian official adjusted his glasses nervously. "That information is compartmentalized. Only select divisions have clearance." "Compartmentalized?" The general snapped. "We nearly sparked a diplomatic catastrophe because your damn compartments don't talk to each other." The official swallowed but didn't respond. Another officer chimed in, voice grim. Lieutenant Whitmore almost fired. "If she had, we'd be in hearings by tomorrow morning, explaining to half the world why we destroyed an ally's prototype." The general didn't answer immediately. He watched Sarah's frozen expression on the feed. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her entire body taut with shock. He recognized that look. It was the look of a soldier who had stared into the abyss of a decision too heavy for one person. "She didn't fire," he said finally. "That matters." Back at Andrews, the colonel paced in front of the consoles, his boots heavy against the tile. He barked orders for reports, data retrieval, and immediate silence about the incident. But his eyes lingered on Sarah. She had obeyed. She had held. She had come within a breath of breaking orders. But she hadn't. The colonel approached her console, his voice low enough that only she and Daniels could hear. "Lieutenant, do you understand what you just prevented?" Sarah looked up, her voice quiet, almost hollow. "Yes, sir." But inside, she wasn't sure what she understood. Did she prevent disaster through discipline? Or had she nearly caused it through hesitation? The question gnawed at her, sharp and relentless. Daniels clapped her shoulder, a gesture of relief more than camaraderie. "You did good, Whitmore." "Better than I would have." She didn't answer. Her eyes remained on the screen, where the Allied drone sat motionless in the field, its dark frame reflecting the sunlight like an omen. In that moment, Sarah realized something that chilled her to the bone. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones flying toward you. Sometimes, the real danger was the silence of orders withheld, the secrets kept too deep, the burdens pushed onto the shoulders of those least equipped to carry them. And tonight, that burden had been hers. The command center resumed its hum of activity, reports drafted, channels buzzing with chatter, but Sarah remained still. Her heart still hadn't slowed. She had been 1 second away from changing history. The transport jet hummed steadily as it cut across the night sky. Sarah sat rigid in her seat, the leather straps of her harness pressing into her shoulders. The flight to Washington had been arranged within hours of the incident, an urgent debriefing that left no room for argument. She had been ordered to report to the Pentagon immediately. Daniels had clapped her on the back before she boarded. "You'll be fine. You did your job." His voice had carried an edge of reassurance, but Sarah caught the flicker in his eyes. He wasn't sure. None of them were. The jet descended into Andrews Air Force Base, and within minutes, Sarah found herself in the back of a black SUV, escorted through the secure gates of the Pentagon. The building loomed before her like an unyielding monolith, lit against the darkness of the city. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening as they drove underground, deeper into the classified levels where only the highest clearances could follow. Inside, she was led down sterile hallways that echoed with the clicks of her polished shoes. Guards stood at every checkpoint, their faces expressionless. Finally, the escort stopped before a large steel door. He swiped his badge, entered a code, and gestured for her to step through. The room was cavernous, dominated by a circular table that gleamed under fluorescent lights. Screens lined the walls, projecting still images of the landed drone, its matte black body gleaming under the sun. Around the table sat a mixture of uniforms and suits: generals, admirals, civilian officials, and men she couldn't identify, but who radiated authority all the same. Every head turned as she entered. "Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore," her escort announced, before stepping aside and letting the heavy door seal behind her. For a heartbeat, Sarah felt as though she were standing trial. A 3-star general at the far end gestured toward a chair. "Lieutenant, please sit." Her movements felt mechanical as she obeyed, her hands resting stiffly in her lap. The general leaned forward, his steely gaze pinning her in place. "You understand why you're here?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. "You were seconds away from firing on an Allied craft. Seconds." His tone wasn't accusatory, it was blunt, a surgical strike of words designed to cut through any illusions. Sarah's throat tightened. "Yes, sir. I was following protocol." It was identified as hostile until it wasn't. That earned the faintest shift of expressions around the table. Some looked away. Others exchanged quick glances. The general's eyes, however, never left hers. What you engaged with was not a hostile drone. It was part of Project Sentinel. The name meant nothing to her. The general continued. "A cooperative program between the United States and one of our closest allies. Testing next-generation autonomous systems for reconnaissance and rapid response. Sarah frowned. Autonomous? Sir, it changed flight patterns. It landed itself. Exactly, another voice said, a civilian in a gray suit, his tone clipped. Project Sentinel is designed to react without operator intervention. It is testing self-correcting algorithms to avoid misidentification and escalation. Tonight's maneuver, its landing, was not coincidence. It was programmed to recognize restricted airspace and self-ground if challenged. The words sank in like lead. It knew. It stopped itself. Sarah gripped the edge of her chair. Then why weren't we told? The silence in the room deepened. Finally, the general answered, his voice heavy. Because you weren't cleared. That program is compartmentalized at levels you will never reach. Your job was to defend. You did that. Sarah's pulse quickened with frustration. With respect, sir, if I had fired, I would have destroyed $1 billion allied asset. I would have lit the fuse on a crisis that no protocol could contain. The general's expression hardened. But you didn't fire. Her voice dropped. Not because of the program. Not because of intel. Because I hesitated. Because I trusted my instinct over an order. That statement rippled through the room like a dropped stone into still water. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others regarded her with a sudden sharpness, as though re-evaluating her entirely. The civilian in the gray suit leaned forward. And that, Lieutenant, is why you're here. Not for discipline. For evaluation. Sarah blinked. Evaluation? The general nodded once. Few people are tested in moments where the entire weight of consequence rests on one decision. Fewer still make the choice you did to stop, to think, to resist the reflex of obedience when doubt whispered otherwise. She wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or terrified. Another official spoke, this one in a navy blazer. Do you realize what the Pentagon has seen tonight? A junior officer who held back where most would have acted, who prevented catastrophe, not because she knew the classified layers, but because she trusted something deeper. Her mouth went dry. Sir, I almost caused disaster. The man shook his head. No, Lieutenant. You prevented it. By not firing, you gave the drone time to reveal itself. Had you acted, we would be repairing far more than steel and circuitry tonight. Sarah sat stunned, her mind spinning. The words should have comforted her, but instead they only deepened the weight pressing on her chest. The general straightened in his chair. You will remain silent about tonight. Officially, the incident did not occur. The drone was never there. The world will not know. Her heart sank. And if the crew asks? You say nothing, he snapped. Your orders come from here now. Sarah clenched her jaw, fighting the surge of frustration building within her. Secrets. Compartmentalization. Orders without context. And soldiers left to carry the unbearable weight of uncertainty. The civilian in gray studied her with a calculating gaze. You have instincts, Lieutenant. Rare ones. They nearly cost us, but tonight they saved us. We will be watching you closely. The words sent a shiver down her spine. The debriefing ended as abruptly as it had begun. Sarah was dismissed, her escort waiting silently to guide her back through the sterile halls. But as she walked, her thoughts churned. She had come within 1 second of firing. She had come within 1 second of rewriting history in fire and wreckage. Now the Pentagon knew it. And they weren't angry. They were interested. The drone had landed in silence, but the echoes of that decision were only beginning to thunder. As she stepped back into the night air, the city of Washington sprawling before her, Sarah realized that her life had shifted on its axis. She was no longer just a lieutenant watching radar screens. She was something else now, something the Pentagon would not forget. And she wasn't sure if that was a gift or a curse. The drive back to Andrews should have been routine. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer traveling through familiar ground. The black SUV's tinted windows turned the Washington lights into smears of color, but her mind was elsewhere, still locked inside that cavernous room in the Pentagon. Every word replayed in her head. "We will be watching you closely." It was meant as praise, but it had carried the cold weight of surveillance, as if invisible strings had been tied to her shoulders. The SUV pulled onto base. The escort didn't speak, not even a polite farewell when she was dropped off near her quarters. Sarah walked the dimly lit path toward her barracks, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. The night air was cool, yet sweat lingered along her collar. When she entered her room, she froze. Someone had been inside. The bunk looked untouched, but subtle differences told the truth. Her locker door was open an inch, though she always shut it tight. Her desk drawers were perfectly aligned, too perfect, as though someone had adjusted them with surgical precision. Her laptop's power light blinked faintly, though she hadn't used it since before the incident. Her pulse spiked. She closed the door softly, locking it behind her, and scanned the room. Nothing was missing. Nothing out of place that couldn't be explained by fatigue or paranoia. But Sarah trusted her instincts. Someone had been here, searching. Her mind leapt immediately to the Pentagon. They're watching already. That night, sleep refused to come. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, her body heavy, but her mind racing. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind against the window set her nerves on edge. She replayed the drone's descent, the green insignia on its wings, the calculating eyes of the officials. And beneath it all, the knowing certainty that her life had shifted into shadows. By morning, her exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. She forced herself into uniform and returned to duty, stepping back into the command center as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Conversations stopped when she entered. Eyes flicked toward her, curious, uncertain. Daniels offered her a half-smile, but even he seemed distant, as though afraid to ask the questions burning in his mind. The others whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Why didn't she fire? She froze. That's what I heard. No, I heard she saw something. Something classified. The rumors spread like wildfire. She wanted to silence them, to shout the truth that she had trusted her instincts, that she had been seconds away from disaster and somehow pulled back from the brink. But the order from the Pentagon rang in her head. You say nothing. So she said nothing. The silence made her an enigma, and in the military, enigmas became myths. Some looked at her with admiration, others with doubt, a few with outright suspicion. Days passed in uneasy rhythm. Each shift at the console felt heavier, as though the very air around her carried the memory of that night. But the real weight settled outside the command center. In the moments when she walked alone across base, the prickling sensation of unseen eyes trailing her. One evening, Daniels caught up with her in the mess hall. He set his tray down across from hers, his expression serious. "Whitmore," he said in a low voice, "you okay?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. You don't look fine. None of us know what happened in D.C., but word is they pulled you in deep. You come back. You're quiet. Different. And your room." He stopped himself, lowering his voice even more. "I think mine's been messed with too. Like someone checked my stuff." Sarah's stomach twisted. "You're sure?" Daniels nodded grimly. "Yeah, we're not paranoid. We're being watched." The words confirmed what she already knew, but hearing them aloud chilled her further. She leaned closer, whispering, "Don't talk about it here. Anywhere. Just don't." His eyes narrowed. "How bad is this?" She didn't answer. That night, unable to sleep again, Sarah found herself wandering the edge of the airfield. The hangars loomed like silent giants, their shadows long under the floodlights. She watched as a cargo plane roared down the runway, its engines shattering the stillness, and felt the strange isolation of her new reality. She had obeyed protocol. She had saved an ally's billion-dollar program. And yet, instead of recognition or closure, she was trapped inside a web of secrecy, her every move scrutinized by unseen hands. As she stood there, the hum of another aircraft reached her ears. She turned, squinting at the night sky. A silhouette moved against the stars, sleek and dark, eerily familiar. Her breath caught. It was the same drone, Project Sentinel. But this time, it wasn't on a monitor. It was right above her, moving silently across the base before vanishing into the clouds. Her skin prickled. Was it coincidence? Another test flight? Or was it watching her the same way the Pentagon was? The questions clawed at her as she returned to her quarters. On her desk, a folded envelope waited. She froze, her pulse hammering. Slowly, she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Report to room 6C47, 2,300 hours. Come alone. No signature. No insignia. Just the words. Her hands trembled as she read it again and again. It could be a prank. It could be a trap. Or it could be the next step into whatever world she had been unwillingly pulled into. By 22:45, Sarah was already walking the narrow corridors of the operations building. The air was silent, the base unusually still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. She found the door marked 6C47. It was unremarkable, steel and unmarked, blending into the endless hallways. She swallowed hard, then opened it. Inside, two figures waited, both in plain clothes, both seated as though they had been expecting her for hours. One gestured toward the chair opposite them. Lieutenant Whitmore. Closed the door. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she obeyed, the door sealing shut behind her. Whatever this was, she had stepped past the point of no return. The steel door hissed shut behind Sarah Whitmore, sealing her in a room that smelled faintly of ozone and industrial polish. The two figures seated across from her remained silent, their faces partially obscured by shadows. One leaned forward, hands clasped on the table, studying her intently. The other simply observed, expression unreadable. Lieutenant Whitmore, the first voice finally spoke, calm but carrying an authority that made her straighten instinctively. You are here because of last week's incident. Sarah swallowed hard, sitting upright in the chair. Her palms were clammy, and her pulse raced. Yes, sir. I followed orders. The man nodded slightly. Indeed. And in doing so, you prevented a potential international incident. But there is more, much more, that you do not yet understand. Her stomach clenched. She had felt that reality pressing against her the moment she left the Pentagon. The drone. Project Sentinel. The silence. Now, it seemed the consequences of her actions were far larger than she had imagined. You were seconds away from firing, the second figure said. Seconds. Yet you did not. Most officers in your position would have acted on instinct. You didn't. You hesitated, and that hesitation has drawn our attention. Sarah's throat tightened. I was trained to follow orders. That's what I did. I didn't fire because the order wasn't given. The first man's eyes narrowed. What you did goes beyond obedience. You acted with judgment in the absence of full information, precisely the skill we have been searching for. That moment revealed something about you, Lieutenant. She frowned, wary. Something about me? Yes, he said, voice low, careful. Your judgment, your restraint, your ability to remain calm, while the weight of catastrophic decision rests entirely on your shoulders. It is rare. Exceptional, even. And that is why we are interested in recruiting you for a special program. Sarah's heart thudded painfully. Recruiting me? The second figure spoke, his tone deliberate. Not just for routine operations. For oversight. Monitoring projects like Sentinel and others still classified. Programs that exist at the highest levels of national defense, beyond even most generals' knowledge. Programs that can alter the balance of power in a heartbeat. She blinked, absorbing the words. Her mind raced. The drone. Its landing. The Pentagon's immediate attention. The secrecy. Everything fit together in a horrifying but compelling puzzle. You want me to... what? She whispered. Observe. Advise. Decide when necessary, the first man said. You will have access to classified intel, clearance beyond your current rank. Your decisions will shape actions that could save or destroy lives on a global scale. You will operate in shadows, Sarah, because the world outside cannot know these programs exist. Neither can most of your colleagues. Sarah's chest tightened. She felt a cold weight settle over her. She had trained to protect her country, yes. But this was not protection. This was intrusion into a world she had never imagined. And what happens if I make a mistake? She asked quietly. The men exchanged a glance. Mistakes at this level are rare, the first said, because the people we select are exceptional. But make no mistake, the responsibility will be yours. Sometimes restraint is more dangerous than action, and action more dangerous than restraint. You already proved you can balance both. She swallowed hard, trying to comprehend the gravity of what they were offering. Her life, her choices, had already changed in one night. She understood, deep down, that there was no going back. The second figure finally leaned forward. You are being given a choice. Accept the position, or continue your current duties, knowing that your career and opportunities will never reach the level you just glimpsed. You may return to your routine, yes, but tonight has proven something. The world will not remain small for you, Lieutenant. It has already expanded, Sarah's mind whirled. The thought of returning to the command center, tracking satellites and drones, seemed suddenly mundane, ordinary, safe, and yet the idea of joining a covert oversight team, wielding responsibility that reached far beyond anyone else's comprehension, was terrifying and intoxicating. Do I get any time to consider this? She asked, voice low, but her curiosity burned through her fear. 2 hours, the first man replied. Then you must return and give us your answer. She nodded, barely able to hold the tremor from her hands. Rising, she walked to the door, her boots clicking against the metal floor. As she paused to look back, she felt the weight of their gaze, a silent acknowledgement that her life had irrevocably changed. The hours passed in a blur. Sarah wandered the Pentagon's outer corridors, her mind racing. Every detail of the night replayed, from the red blip on her screen to the drone's graceful landing in the field. She thought of Daniels, of her colleagues, of the silent vigilance required to save lives while remaining ignorant of the larger forces at play. She thought of the secrecy and how it would consume her. Not just her own thoughts, but every interaction. Who could she trust if she joined the program? Who would understand the weight she now carried? The answer was simple. No one. Yet, despite the fear, a spark of exhilaration burned within her. She had been tested and chosen. The Pentagon had recognized her instinct, her judgment, her capacity to act decisively without being reckless. She would have access to information, power, and responsibility unlike anything she had ever imagined. When she returned to the room, she felt a new awareness settling into her bones. She was no longer just a lieutenant tracking unidentified aircraft. She was someone who would hold, decide, and sometimes choose alone when no orders were forthcoming. Her choices could shape nations, alliances, and the fate of lives she would never see. The men waited, as still and silent as statues. She exhaled slowly and stepped forward. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice was steady, carrying a weight that surprised even her. "I'll take the position." The first man inclined his head. "Welcome, Lieutenant. You are entering a world few ever glimpse. Your life, your work, and your choices will never be the same. But you have proven tonight that you are capable." The second man added, "Your first assignment will come shortly. For now, understand this. Project Sentinel was only the beginning. There are others. Programs that exist beyond imagination. And you will be the first line of judgment should they ever cross into danger." Sarah swallowed, her pulse hammering. The gravity of her new path stretched before her like a dark horizon. She had chosen to step into secrecy, into responsibility, into a life where hesitation and restraint could carry consequences beyond comprehension. She left the room, escorted back through the corridors, her mind spinning with possibilities and dangers. Every step was measured, precise, but inside, she felt the storm of adrenaline and fear building. Back in her quarters, she sat alone, staring at the ceiling. The room seemed smaller now, constricted by the magnitude of what she had agreed to. The world outside remained oblivious. Civilians walked, planes flew, the city of Washington breathed in ignorant peace. But she had glimpsed a layer beyond that reality, a hidden war of judgment, calculation, and restraint, where seconds decided the fate of nations. And she had chosen to be part of it. The sun had barely risen over Andrews Air Force Base when Sarah Whitmore stepped onto the tarmac. The early morning chill bit at her face, yet she barely noticed it. Her mind was alive with the weight of the decision she had made the previous night. She had accepted the Pentagon's offer, entered a world invisible to most, yet shaping the fate of countless lives. The base was quiet, almost eerily so. Aircraft engines hummed in the distance, and the occasional clang of metal echoed from maintenance hangars. But Sarah's thoughts were elsewhere, circling like hawks over everything she had experienced in the past week. She thought of the red marker on her console, the seconds that had almost led to catastrophe, the drone that had defied expectation and landed itself. She remembered the murmurs of the command center, the hush in the Pentagon briefing room, and the unseen eyes that had watched her every move. And now, she had become one of those eyes. Walking toward the operations center, Sarah felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. The responsibilities awaiting her were beyond comprehension, yet her instincts, honed by years of training and sharpened by the recent ordeal, told her she could handle them. She had seen what hesitation could cause, what silence could conceal, and what decisions in the shadows truly demanded. Inside the operations center, she was greeted with the usual hum of activity. Screens flickered with live feeds, data streams, and satellite imagery. But she moved past them with a new sense of purpose. She was no longer merely a lieutenant tracking unknown objects. She was a sentinel herself, entrusted with judgment in moments when seconds could change history. Daniels approached her, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Wait more," he said quietly. "Everyone's talking about last night. You handled it differently." She shook her head. "I didn't do anything heroic. I followed my instincts, and I held my position. That's all." Daniel smiled faintly, though unease lingered in his eyes. "Heroism doesn't always feel like heroism, does it?" Sarah didn't answer. She turned to the large monitors, her eyes scanning the blinking markers and moving objects. Each one could be an unknown threat or a controlled asset. The line between danger and security was thinner than ever, and she knew that her judgment would be tested repeatedly. Her first assignment arrived silently, an encrypted file appearing on her personal console. She opened it with deliberate caution. The briefing detailed Project Sentinel's next phase, a simulation of multiple simultaneous drone incursions. each one testing response protocols, risk assessment, and human judgment. Sarah's pulse quickened. These were simulations, yes, but the stakes were real in every sense. Lives could be at risk if the training went awry. The Pentagon had entrusted her with oversight, and she would be the one deciding when intervention was necessary. As she read, a familiar figure entered her peripheral vision: Colonel Harper, the commanding officer she had worked under before the Pentagon intervention. He stopped beside her console, studying the display with careful scrutiny. "You'll find the simulations challenging," he said, voice low. "But remember this. Restraint is just as important as action. Your judgment tonight proved that." Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long moment before continuing. "You've changed, Lieutenant. The others will notice it soon. Some may respect it. Some may resent it. But the important thing is this. You understand what it means to carry responsibility without recognition." The word settled over her. Recognition. She realized she no longer sought it. Her actions, her choices, her silence, they were part of a larger whole, part of a system that no one outside the walls of the Pentagon would ever fully understand. The day passed in a blur of activity. Sarah oversaw simulations, analyzed live telemetry, and made judgment calls with the calm precision that had earned her this place. Each decision required balance, weighing probability against potential catastrophe, considering consequences she could barely imagine. During a brief moment of reprieve, she stepped outside the operations center and gazed at the horizon. The sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the base. The world seemed normal, peaceful even, yet she knew how fragile that peace could be. One misstep, one impulsive action, could unravel everything. Her thoughts drifted back to the drone in the field, Project Sentinel. She had watched it descend, almost as though it were aware of her hesitation. That memory lingered, a reminder that judgment and timing were everything. Seconds mattered more than anyone could quantify. The door to the operations center opened quietly, and an aide approached with a secure tablet. She took it without a word, scanning the contents. Another layer of the program awaited her: review algorithms, live feeds, risk assessments. Every detail, every contingency, every anomaly passed through her hands. She realized that her life had transformed into one of constant vigilance. There would be no room for distraction, no luxury of ignorance. As the evening shadows lengthened, Sarah returned to her quarters. Her room, which had once felt ordinary and safe, now felt like a temporary refuge. She unpacked her thoughts as carefully as she unpacked her gear. Every decision she made, every call she would oversee, carried weight far beyond the walls of the base. She thought again of the Pentagon briefing. "We will be watching you closely." It was not a threat. It was a recognition. She was now part of a network operating in silence, a chain of judgment stretching beyond the comprehension of ordinary life. Her vigilance would save lives. Her restraint would prevent disaster. And she understood, finally, that heroism could exist in silence, in restraint, in a decision held back at the precise moment it mattered most. Sarah sat by the window, watching the night deepen. The stars twinkled like distant satellites, distant points of observation in a vast, unknowable world. She understood now that she had chosen a life of constant awareness, a life where seconds determined the fate of millions, and where the weight of responsibility could never be shared. Yet despite the burden, she felt a strange calm. She had faced a choice that could have destroyed everything. And she had acted not recklessly, not out of fear, but with clarity, judgment, and integrity. Her eyes lingered on the horizon. The world outside slept peacefully, oblivious to the forces moving in the shadows. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She was ready. Ready for the challenges, ready for the responsibility, and ready for the weight of the silence that her duty demanded. Lieutenant Sarah Whitmore had survived the first true test of her judgment. The world would never know her name, the drone would continue its experiments, and Project Sentinel would advance. But she would be there watching, deciding, restraining, acting, because she was the line between chaos and control, between catastrophe and salvation. And in that silent, unseen heroism, she had found her place.